Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining another episode of the Educational Leadership Podcast. We have another very special guest. Before we introduce our guest, we'd love to give a shout out to our co-host, Corinne Fritsch.
Woo-hoo! So glad to be here for another wonderful episode.
Yeah, so exciting. And before we introduce the guest, just want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Ideal Impact. Ideal Impact's giving hundreds of millions of dollars to school districts around the great state of Texas. And so if your district needs funding, unrestricted funds for teacher salaries or whatever it may be, reach out to Ideal Impact. Okay, now for today's interview, we have Dr. Augustine from Hamshire, Fannett. How you doing today, Dr. Augustine?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. And we're very excited about today's podcast. Before we jump into that, if you can share a little bit about your background.
Yes, so I'm the superintendent at Hampshire Fannett ISD. I'm in year 7 of the superintendency. I began like most superintendents as a classroom teacher. I taught English and then sort of worked through the educational system as an assistant principal, a high school principal, an assistant superintendent across many different areas in the school system, and then in my current role as a superintendent. Oddly enough, I sort of got into education by accident. My first career, I was actually a firefighter. And so it was a unique transition out of that career field into education. But oddly enough, I've found some things that really sort of cut across from that profession into this one.
Very cool. Very interesting. Wow. So we always have these unique backgrounds from school superintendents. So if you think you have public education completely figured out, you're wrong, because there's so many different backgrounds. So very exciting. So if you can, what are you passionate about right now? You have a unique perspective on public education. What are you passionate about in public ed?
Yeah, so more so than ever, I think now teacher retention, teacher recruitment, getting people into the field of education is a passion I have right now. I think a lot of us have heard quite a bit about it, and I think COVID sort of spurred it on and put it more into the public eye, coming out of the COVID situation. But we've been seeing this in education for quite some time, and we knew we'd get to this point. So I'm really passionate about that. And I guess coming into the field from a totally different area, and having education sort of being a calling, so to speak. And as I talk to educators, over the years, I think most of us feel that way, that we're in this because we're sort of called to do this sort of work.
I've heard some people go as far as to say it's the Lord's work. And I love that when I hear someone mention that it's the work it's so sacred. Tell us about your why and maybe what keeps you going right now. I think that'll help inspire people because it has been a tough couple of years, and teachers are leaving the field at rates we've never seen before. And so tell us about your why and what keeps you going.
That's interesting, Corinne, that you would ask that question, because, superintendents across the state are expected to have a convocation every year, right? And you have to come up with a message. And so what's the message? Interestingly, this year, the message was tapping into your why. And so my actual presentation this year to the faculty and the staff was my why. And I linked it back to my career in high school. And I had this one teacher coach who connected to me. And I think in a lot of ways, sort of saved my life in some ways, and so that's my why. I mean, so my why is to be that sort of impact or help people. As a superintendent, you're not connected to kids in that way anymore, like a teacher would be. But how do you impact the people who are connected to kids in that way, so they could, serve kids in that way and literally save lives in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's so critical. Your why. I mean, not a lot of people think about what is really driving them, right? What's the bigger vision? What's that overarching theme in their life that keeps them motivated day to day? Now, you had mentioned teachers, right? So teachers and others, and finding teachers, that sort of thing. What do you see as the situation right now? I mean, what's kind of driving the change you think around teacher, finding great teachers or keeping teachers in the field?
Oddly, I don't think there's a significant change, and I think I hinted at this earlier. I've been a school administrator for over 20 years now, and we saw this years ago, 15, 20 years ago. We saw the state of where the current age of teachers were, and then when you project it out, 10, 15, 20 years, if you had the overwhelming number of retirees, which we've had, and we're starting to see that and experience that, if we didn't get more people into educational programs, and again, this was 15, 20 years ago, we knew that the numbers coming in were not going to keep up with the numbers that were going out. And so it's not directly related to COVID, although COVID probably and these sorts of things exacerbated it. But we saw this coming a long time, and so we weren't as proactive to get more people into educational programs.
I think you're right. I mean, we weren't as proactive. Knowing my experience as a trustee, we weren't as proactive. And so I'm wondering, Gary is really big into being innovative, and I come from an education background, so I'm always like, no, change takes time. We gotta be careful, And even when we talked right before I hit record about starting this podcast, I'm like, oh, let me wait, let's think about it, let me wait. And Gary's like, come on. And I think when we did experience a global pandemic, we made public education go online overnight, and many people have projected that kind of one-to-one learning, that kind of style of learning could have taken up to 10 years. That's one projection I heard. What else can we be doing? You mentioned we saw the writing on the wall. We were going to have a shortage at some point. COVID could have exacerbated it a bit, maybe. But what else can we be? Where are some other areas that we can be innovative, that we might be missing out? And those that are decision makers like you, and those that are listening to the podcast that are other decision makers like you, where can we go next? Like, what do we need to be thinking of next?
And I think we're starting to do some of these things, and the agency, Texas, the TEA has formed this task force, teacher vacancy task force, and they're starting to do some of that work and publish some of the things from the field. I think it's what TEA calls it. One of those critical things I know that we're doing, and many other districts have started to do this, is because of the shortage, we are taking in people who have that passion to teach, that they've already established, I have a why and why I want to teach, but there's some barriers for them getting into the field. And a major barrier is, well, I just don't have that degree yet. Mm-hmm. And so in comes programs like, we call them teaching associates. I've seen other districts call them adjunct teachers. And so we're bringing them in. We are paying these individuals not a full teacher salary, but that salary is offset because we're paying for them to complete their education. And so they're completing their education. We're assigning them an instructional coach. And so we're offering, support to them. They're getting their degree. They're doing the work that a substitute would have been doing anyway. But it's taken us this long just to think of it. And it's taken this long for the agency to actually support us doing this kind of work as well. So I think that's been one of the newest things. And I think that sort of program, if we sort of grow that and have that become a little more robust, I think we'll get those individuals that we were talking about earlier, connected to a why, and get them trained into the program of teaching. And I think that's going to help us grow on over the next 10 years.
I love it. It's like an apprenticeship for teachers. It's that makes perfect sense. I guess they say, what is it? Necessity is the mother of invention, or
absolutely.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. What else is happening around that? I mean, what as far as change goes and innovation, what are you seeing right now in public ed, or maybe in your district right now?
Well, the other thing I'm saying is we are, and not only us, but across the state, I think we're talking to higher ed more than we ever have before. And Corinne could probably vouch for that.
Yes.
I've had more conversations with the local dean of our university here than I've ever had before. And again, necessity is forcing us to have those conversations and think of those ways that we can become innovative in getting people into the field. One of the things I didn't realize is how many people in higher ed were getting their teaching degrees online now.
Mhm.
What used to be a almost completely in-person process to become a teacher is now being transformed and done online. And so how do we now take that platform, work with universities to make that experience more meaningful and more connective
Mhm.
to K-12?
I want to say something so our guests, for our guests listening, we never really fully iron out exactly what we're saying. We want to say on these conversations because we want them to be organic. So I'm going to ask you something that's kind of putting you on the spot.
Yeah.
But what do you need from higher ed? If you have someone from higher ed listening,
Yeah.
my whole role is helping students transition from high school to college. So I specifically work with districts and partner with local districts. I'm always trying to find ways. I think my role as a trustee helped me see the whole P16, the K-12 to the higher ed piece and connected it. But I don't know that we ask it enough. What do you need? What does K-12 need from higher ed?
All right. Well, since you asked, so if I had that magic wand, right? I think what we would need from higher ed is to say, okay, how can we pool our resources? School districts get a significant amount of Title I funds, for example, Title II funds, things like that. Here in these last few years, we had an influx of ESSER funds. Why couldn't we work together, higher ed and K-12, and create apprenticeship programs so that the teacher prep program no longer is a university-based program, neither physically nor online, but it becomes a program that's based in K-12 schools?
I think we should make another conversation about. I think we need to have an.
And so how do we make that work, and how do we make that beneficial for every one of us, the candidate, the higher ed, K-12? I think we could do that. It's a matter of us coming together, pooling resources, and that's both financial resources and human resources, because we have many resources in the schools. We have lots of people, even in a smaller school district like mine. We have several teachers with master's degrees. We have assistant principals, people who have the education to work with higher ed to make this truly a residential sort of experience for teachers. So I think we can do both. I think we can really do the scholarly work with them, but also give them that hands-on experience. And I think they'll be better prepared for the classroom.
That's brilliant. I know there are students who struggle with receiving funding so that they can do their student teaching.
Right.
And that should not be a barrier. You shouldn't be almost all the way finished with your education degree at a four-year institution and then not be able to take that time to do the substitute or to do those last bits of your degree. And there are some districts that are doing some innovative work there, and some higher ed programs or institutions that are. But I think that's a conversation. We talked about having a mastermind at some point. Gary, I think this is a brilliant thing to dive into. It's wide open. There's so many possibilities with this that I think we have to do something innovative in this space, because I don't want to see four-year institutions go away either. I love the ability to help students, encourage students when they're here at my institution, but as things have changed and we now know some things can be done differently, if we don't make some adjustments, I fear for all of it. So yeah, I think you're onto something there for sure.
Yeah, I really like the collaborative approach, with higher ed, internally, externally. We had another guest on the podcast. It's probably been quite a bit of time now since they were a guest, but they had a collaboration with local businesses, right? So the community businesses. Speaking of, I'm not to go into a whole lot of detail, but I'm recording the podcast right now from MD Anderson Hospital, without going into a lot of detail. But one thing's unique about their approach to medicine is that they have a collaborative approach where they have all these doctors. Every Thursday they get together and they review a particular cancer situation, and they have all these unique perspectives. Now, all of these doctors are very sophisticated, very educated people, but they still come together and they collaborate on the right approach. And just that mindset or that perspective in general, I think is very helpful from an innovation standpoint. So I think that's awesome to kind of have that same approach in education.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we can learn a lot from medicine in that regard. And, I like the example, and I've sort of used it before, but it was more in the context of teaching and learning. You guys have probably heard about professional learning communities, the whole PLC process. Mm-hmm. And so if done correctly, the PLC process should work, Gary, just like what you explained with what those doctors are doing, right? And what they're doing, they're coming together to learn from each other because they're seeing different things from the field, and they come together and they put that knowledge together and they figure out how to improve the practice of medicine, particularly in this case, cancer medicine. And so if we allow teachers to do that, what we know is kids are going to learn more, from adults learning more. But this is just taking another step and bringing together a different set of professional collaborative with higher ed and K-12. And so how do we put out a better teacher? And I think we could do that using that model, Gary, that you just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Very exciting. Yeah. And
absolutely.
We could probably take this conversation on a tangent, talking about technology and, artificial intelligence, maybe a little chat GPT. I don't know if y'all are, but because that's kind of a collaboration, but I know we're approaching the end of time here. Maybe we'll save that for another episode. But Corinne, before I ask the ice bucket challenge question, do you have any question?
Yes, I would love to know your big ask. About to head into a new legislative session. Hopefully this podcast will air in the next couple of weeks. And so what is your big ask to ed leaders and to the Texas public who are voting for some of these leaders? What's your big ask and your big dream for public ed?
Oh, wow. That is a big question. Well, and I'll take it back to my original comment about teachers, hiring, recruiting, retaining, et cetera. You look at districts like mine, for example, we're below the national average in terms of pay. And so one of the things that we know is that's one area where teachers say that they're dissatisfied with is teacher pay. They feel they should be paid on par with, other people who have equal sort of education, et cetera. Just adding something to the basic allotment for districts to address teacher pay, that will go a long way, I think.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Love it. No, I love that. Well, okay. So now we're going to do the ice bucket challenge. I don't know why I call it that. It's not that great of a name. So
the shout out challenge.
The shout out challenge. So if you were Dr. Augustine, if you were to recommend or give a shout out to another superintendent or leader in education that they should come on here and share their story, who would you want to give a shout out to?
Oh, wow. I would say Dr. McFarland, Mike McFarland, and Fannett ISD. I don't know if you've had I don't know if you had him on, but he just got appointed to the State Board of Educator certification by the governor. And so I would give a shout out to him.
Awesome. Corinne, anything you want to add to that?
I'm on it. I can't wait to tell. I'm going to text him now if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell him that you said it. And yes, Dr. McFarland is a dear friend, and what an honor also to know that he was appointed to that. So absolutely on it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Augustine, thanks again for being on the podcast today. Hopefully we can have you on again, and we'll keep you updated on, we have some pretty interesting things that are coming here at the first of the year. We have a digital summit that we're talking about, maybe even a mastermind. So we'll keep you updated on that. And then Corinne, thank you for being an awesome co-host as usual. And before we close out, we just want to give a shout out to our sponsor one more time. Ideal Impact is giving hundreds of millions of dollars. So far, they've given $675 million to public education in Texas, to over 180 school districts. And so if your school district needs higher teacher salaries or funding or unrestricted funds for whatever the needs may be, reach out to Ideal Impact. And for those of y'all that have been listening in, stay tuned for future episodes of the Educational Leadership Podcast.